Extreme weather cripples China as record temperatures cause droughts in half of the country. The verdict on Thai Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha's suspension could come by September. Hello, you're watching The Big Story with me, Chiao Su An. Subscribe to the Straits Times channel to stay up to date with our live news updates. A crippling drought in China has now spread across half of the country. Rivers drying up, shipping halted, and temperatures soaring. The worst affected area, the Yangtze River basin, stretching from Shanghai to Sichuan in the southwest, is home to over 370 million people, including the megacity of Chongqing. And there is no relief in sight, with temperatures of up to 40 degrees Celsius expected to continue in the next few days. China correspondent Elizabeth Law joins us from Beijing. Thanks for joining us, Liz. How bad is the situation in the southwest? Any major disruptions? And what are some ways people are coping with the heat and drought?
Right. So what we've seen in the southwest, especially in cities like Chongqing, which are very badly affected because these are considered one of the 4大火炉, or the four fire stoves, so-called, of China, which are traditionally very, very hot places during summer. So these are the areas which are seeing a lot more impact. Like we've all seen images over the last few days of lakes and rivers, almost drying up. And in Leshan, which is in Sichuan province, where there's a very famous Buddha by a river, more of the Buddha has been exposed than ever before in a very, very long time. A lot of small towns, they have been sending volunteer firefighters to help put out forest fires on the mountain because temperatures have simply just gone through the roof, and it's so hot and dry that it sparks a lot of forest fires within the mountainous areas. And some at the outskirts of the cities have also reported seeing bushfires that are going on in the terrain surrounding them. The government is also cognizant of what is going on because at the same time, there is extreme weather that is going on within China. In the south, in Guangdong province, Typhoon Ma has just made landfall. And so really it's quite a lot of extreme weather going on now. And yesterday after a state council meeting, Premier Li Keqiang had actually announced that 10 billion yuan will be put into mitigation efforts for disaster relief, especially related to extreme weather. So all of these signs that we're seeing, we know that a lot of people in places like Chengdu and Chongqing have been trying to escape the heat in neighboring provinces like Guizhou. And also within the cities itself, when people can't move, the government has been trying to reduce electricity usage in places, in industries and factories, and also in certain municipal areas like street lights and public utilities. They have been trying to reduce the use, like by dimming the lights or by switching off a few more of the lights.
So Liz, I understand you're in Beijing. What are things like where you are? How are you coping? And has there been any major disruptions for you, for example, travel plans, etc.?
I think that is a two-part question. So Beijing had been going through a little bit of a heat wave as well, but because it's much further north. So actually, we have been seeing very beautiful weather in the last few days. It's been about between 28 to 26 degrees in the day and down to 18 degrees at night. So it's almost as though it's two separate countries. But when you talk about disrupted travel plans, of course, because China is also going through yet another wave of COVID outbreaks, so that we have seen a lot of flight cancellations, we've seen movement restrictions. And earlier I mentioned the city of Chongqing. Chongqing, amidst the heat wave and amidst the drought that is going on, is also battling a COVID outbreak. The entire city was just ordered to do mass COVID testing yesterday. So it is a city that is really struggling quite hard over the last few weeks, not to mention the forest fires that they have to deal with.
Well, it sounds like Chongqing is going through quite a lot. This has been China correspondent Elizabeth Law. And on the ground in Chongqing, ST China correspondent Denson Cheong had to buy a pair of new shoes after extreme heat melted the soles of his shoes. The heat has been so unbearable that a resident Denson spoke to told him that people are staying home with the air conditioning on because they don't dare to go out into the heat. Now, over in Southeast Asia, Thailand looks set to face yet another period of uncertainty. This after its Prime Minister was suspended by the country's constitutional court. Thai Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha's suspension will be upheld until the court comes to a verdict, which local media has reported could come by September. Mr. Prayut has been suspended from his official duties pending the result of a legal review of his 8-year term. This after a petition from opposition lawmakers was submitted. Deputy Prime Minister Prawit Wongsuwan will serve as caretaker PM in the interim. Joining us now to tell us more about what is happening over in Bangkok is Thailand correspondent Tan Tam Mei. Thanks for joining us, Tam Mei. So do we actually expect a new Thai PM then? What are the courts likely to do, and does Mr. Prayut have a case at all?
Yeah, hi Suan. It's hard to say if we can expect a new Thai PM. It really depends on the court's verdict. And if they do decide that Mr. Prayut has breached the 8-year limit, there'll be a process that's triggered, where Parliament has to choose a new PM from an existing list of nominees that they had already put up in the 2019 elections. But we have to bear in mind that Mr. Prayut's coalition government has the majority of seats in Parliament. So it should be relatively easy for them to sway the vote if they do. And I think another thing we need to consider is that national elections are coming soon. They're expected by early 2023. So if a new PM is elected soon after this case, he or she could be somewhat of a temporary thing because it will just be for 6 months. So I'm not too sure, if we can expect a new Thai PM coming, and just a lot of factors, Yeah, and I think for one, people are not raising their hopes for a verdict that is unfavorable for Mr. Prayut, because in the past, critics have always labeled this constitutional court as typically leaning towards the conservative establishment, which is people like military. And I think for this, it's also interesting to note that the 9 court judge, all of them found that there was a valid case to be investigated. So that's a bit of an unusual thing. And actually 5 of the 9 decided to suspend Mr. Prayut immediately. So I think some political analysts do say that this part is a bit of a surprise. And it does pique some interest as to whether or not this does portend to anything about the eventual verdict. Will there be a slim majority that decides that he has actually breached this tenure limit? But then again, all this is speculation on our part. And I think at the heart of this issue, the problem really is that the Constitution, established in 2017, doesn't say when this countdown starts. And most of Mr. Prayut's critics and even many legal scholars have interpreted this start date for his tenure as 2014. And they say that the compelling argument is that is the most simple or layman way to read this particular section. And there are other documents as well that they reference that say actually do indicate there is some continuity in terms of things that happened before the 2017 Constitution and after the 2017 Constitution. But then there are 2 other ways of interpreting this 8-year tenure. And some legal experts say it's also fair to say that Mr. Prayut's term starts in 2017, which is when the Constitution was established. That means he has 2 more years left on his tenure. But then there are some questions about this, what do you consider the years from 2014 to 2017 when he was PM? Are they invalid? Do his orders still stand? There's quite a lot of questions still. And there's another more generous interpretation that says that his term only started in 2019, because that was when he was elected in as the civilian PM under this 2017 Constitution. So that will give him 5 more years on the cards. So there are various ways of interpreting it, and legal scholars have also admitted it's a bit of a open-ended thing because it does not state the exact terms, and it really depends on how the courts interpret it.
So outside of the courts, Thailand has had a rocky few years politically. Let's talk about public sentiment. Are the Thais divided in opinion, or is there a consensus on the ground? How have the Thais reacted so far?
So the immediate reaction after the court's announcement yesterday was many pro-democracy and government opposition did celebrate. There were lots of positive messages, even speeches, and even on social media. But they soon realized that the suspension is only temporary, and the caretaker PM, Mr. Prawit, is actually a close ally of Mr. Prayut, and he himself is a fellow military man, and he will be taking over. So realistically, it's the same group of people running the country, and they will more or less act in the same vein. For the Thai administration, it probably wants to keep it that way, doesn't want to shake the boat, because Thailand has some big meetings coming up, some big important events, including the APEC meeting in November, which everyone, including all levels of government, have been preparing for. So it's in their interest to keep things status quo. And for the anti-Prayut camp, I think they did study the way the court's decision, and many of them still headed out to protest after news yesterday, as they realized things are more or less the same. It's the same group of leaders, and I have to say, unfortunately, the demonstrators have not been able to get the same mass that they had pre-COVID. But the small groups that have started going onto the street, even from Sunday, they are small groups, but they are very passionate, and they have been very sustained in terms of their protests. Some have even stayed overnight at the areas that they are at. And I think for this case, the biggest winners at the end of the day are the opposition lawmakers, specifically the main opposition party called Per Thai. They were the ones who filed the petition to the court and triggered this whole case. And whatever the court's ruling will be, this will become an election issue, and I'm sure Per Thai will use it, in their platform, because if Mr. Prayut is removed permanently based on what the courts decide, this will signal a weakened coalition government. And if the courts decide to restore Mr. Prayut to the post, this will only support Per Thai's narrative of a biased government system. So at the end of the day, Thailand's politics, is only made more complicated because of what happened. The same people are still in charge, but there's just a bit of a shuffling of the leaders who are in charge. So it's still colorful at the end of the day.
Thank you, Tammei. That has been Thailand correspondent Tan Tammei. Also in the news, veteran Malaysian politician Mahathir Mohamad says former Prime Minister Najib Razak is highly likely to receive a royal pardon and be released from a 12-year jail sentence, without elaborating on why he thought that would happen. As Prime Minister, Mahathir reopened the investigations into 1MDB that led to Najib's downfall. And even if Najib does not get a pardon soon, legal experts say he may serve a much shorter period in prison, with his term reduced by as much as 4 years. And in a video that has gone viral, 2 Taiwanese soldiers are seen throwing rocks at a Chinese civilian drone, which was spotted hovering near their guard post. Taiwanese officials confirmed the incident occurred on August 16th on the Erdan Islet in Kinmen County. China has not commented on the footage, which has been viewed millions of times on Chinese social media. Taiwan's defense ministry said in a separate statement that it will deploy anti-drone systems starting next year. And that's it from us today. Visit straitstimes.com for more news and our YouTube channel for more videos. Subscribe by hitting the red button below. I'm Chao Suen, and I'll see you tomorrow on The Big Story.